All right, so I guess what's old is new again. Fairly long, I suppose. How did I get into Street Fighter? How did I originally start getting into tournaments? And I'll tell some stories about when I first started entering tournaments, right? So I told some of these stories before. I'll try to think of some new ones to tell, but keeping my channel active, and I guess this mic is newer than when I told these stories maybe a couple years or so ago now, right? So first of all, for the tournament stuff, how did I get into Street Fighter? Well, I'm at that kind of weird age where I guess I'm old enough to remember things like Street Fighter 2, and I was very young when it came out. So I told the story before. Some of my only happy memories, even in childhood, is when I might see my grandma once or twice a week or whatever it was, and she might take me to the arcade and play Street Fighter 2, or any kind of video game at the time. And of course, Street Fighter 2 was just so big at the time. I mean, you could go to the mall and they have video games. At Sears or J.C. Penney, whatever it was, and Street Fighter 2 was so big, there'd be like a line to even play it. It was insane. It was really a cultural phenomenon. It was a crazy time to be alive. But I guess you could say, so I don't want to waste too much time on this, but like I said, some of my only happy memories of playing video game, or as a childhood, was when I would actually get to play video games. And so I was never one of those kids that had, hyper fighting all these games for Super Nintendo. I only had just regular Street Fighter 2, and when I could go to the arcade basically to play games. So we didn't have everything growing up, right? So I guess you could say maybe from that perspective, maybe that's when I had to start teaching myself. I had to practice in my head, especially because, the video game was so big back then. So, of course, there were lines and lines out the arcade to play Street Fighter 2. So you had to practice somehow, and I only got to play video games every now and then. So maybe that's in one way how I had to get good at practicing by myself. You know what I mean? By imagining how the game works, since I didn't get to really play by myself a lot. You know what I mean? If at all. And so maybe again, that's how I've been able to now accurately guess how all these video games are going to work year after year now without ever playing them, right? So. And of course, as time went on, I had actually thought that Street Fighter died as a kid because Street Fighter Alpha 2 was just so unpopular. I didn't even think that Street Fighter survived. I remember when I heard that Street Fighter Alpha 3 came out on PlayStation, I legitimately had no idea that there was even a Street Fighter Alpha 3, because I just thought Street Fighter died because no one played Street Fighter Alpha 2 at the arcades. It was just so ridiculously unpopular, and Street Fighter 3 was very unpopular as well. So anyway, moving along. So eventually, during CVS 1 or whatever, how I got into tournaments is, I had grown up, reading about guys like Mike Watson and stuff like this, and that there was tournaments and stuff like this, but I wasn't really someone that ever used the internet, you know what I mean? Just wasn't, I'm a nerd, but I think if anyone knows me, I'm not really computer savvy at all. So I know what the internet is, but I was never someone that was looking for Street Fighter on the internet because I just wasn't, right? But anyway, I remember reading about tournaments before, and I had always just thought it was something that I could never enter. I don't know why. I was a kid, right? I was winning tournaments before I could even drive. It was ridiculous. But before we get into that, so I couldn't even drive. I was very baby, still very young at this time, right? And someone had told me, "Oh, hey Clayton, there's a tournament for CVS. You know what I mean? And you can enter if you want." And I was like, "Oh, like a Street Fighter tournament?" And they're like, "Yeah, and anyone can enter." And I was like, "Oh shit, really?" I'm like, "Oh, okay, right." So I just randomly went there, and of course, some of the people I met there, some of my only friends to this day in the video game community. I know I met AJ there, who is still one of my only friends. I met Bhaskar there, and I didn't meet Scott yet, but I don't have a lot of people I consider friends in the video game community, but my very first tournament is one of the only, maybe it's because people knew me when I was so young that they're still my friend, instead of, throughout these years I've met all these fake video game dudes who tried to say I faked being sick, etc. But anyway, so at this tournament, I went there and I just started playing people in casual, and I was beating all these dudes, right? And it was in Ann Arbor, so it was like a college town. So there's also, foreign exchange students or something, whatever they were at the time. And I remember I'd beaten, I don't know, I guess it was a Japanese dude or some Asian dude. And it was the first time anyone had ever beaten him, my friend said. He's like, dude, you know you're the first guy that's ever beaten that guy before. He's like, I've never seen that guy ever lose a match. And I was like, oh, really? I was like, sweet. So I must be doing pretty good in the tournament, right? Is he going to enter the tournament? And he's like, well, no, he's not going to enter the tournament now. He's like, but all these other people are coming. And these other people that were going to the tournament were, also considered good. There was the best guy. There's the guy that was considered the best in Michigan at the time, and he was considered second best in the Midwest of America at the time, and the only person that had ever beat him was Flo at the time, I guess, from what I was told, and that was Dre, and I'll get into a story about him as well. And there's other dudes coming around from the country that had just been placing at ECC and all these kind of things, right? So again, basically, long story short, I basically demolished everybody but Dre, who was, again, considered the second best in the Midwest of America at the time for like Street Fighter and stuff like that, I guess, apparently. Like I said, the only guy that had ever beat him, I guess, in these tournaments, right now was Flo. Anyway, so I basically demolished everybody. And I think Dre beat me, I want to say he beat me 3-2 or something like that. And anyway, people were like, oh man, dude, hey kid, you're good. You should enter tournaments. And I'm like, oh, I'm good at video games? I had no idea, right? Because, I don't know. Just play Street Fighter for fun, right? So anyway, so I started entering tournaments. I was going to enter tournaments after that. And I told the story after that it was a Midwest championship. And I went to that. And so during casual, man, I was destroying everybody. I think finally it was Valle who beat me. He came back a second time and he beat me. And I still remember how he beat me to this day too. But man, I was, absolutely destroying people. And I was pumped for this tournament. And, people were like, damn, who's this like fucking surfer boy kid, right? Anyway, so basically, if you know how tournaments worked back then, everything was so fucking slow and everything like that. Everything was so delayed, you know what I mean, to get to work. And of course, I've had bad health for a long time now. And, by waiting for this tournament to finally start, I ended up getting sick. And I remember just like laying on a Daytona machine. And by the time that the tournament started, I was just crumpled over in pain and I was completely fucked up, dude. I don't even remember what place I got, but I was completely fucked up, you know what I mean? And I had to go to the hospital after, and it was, not a good situation. So anyway, so skipping ahead, there was one more tournament before that or after that, and that was the tournament. I don't know if I told the story on the YouTube video, but I probably told it on a stream. After that was the tournament. There was one more tournament where, again, because I couldn't drive at this time, so people had to take us. A friend's dad drove us to a tournament, and he was like, how long do these tournaments take? And we're like, oh, it's probably going to be all day or a few hours, whatever the fuck it is, most of the day, right? And then basically he came in like a half hour later, an hour later, and he's like, hey man, you guys done yet? We got to go. And this is actually that kind of drug friend that I've told you guys about, who has so many insane fucking stories with this guy, right? And he kept coming in half hours like, dude, we got to go. He was like, that's the kind of dude he was, you know what I mean? He was the stoner kind of dad, right? And finally, it was just such a fucking clusterfuck of this guy, tap, are you ready to go? I was like, what is going on? And so we left, and what happened was we found out the dad is there, and there's two people with him, and he didn't have a car. And basically what happened, since it was in Detroit, the dad tried to pick up this undercover hooker. And so basically he got arrested, and he was like, hey, I'm with my son and his friend at this tournament. And so basically, I guess we went with these two undercover cops, and they fucking drove us home, dude. And it was, what a story that was. So anyway, basically after that, and then I've told this story, how I found out the video game community was very shady. So I don't remember if I had checked the internet before this or after this, but I'll tell this tournament story before this, because I don't remember exactly when I checked the internet. But then there was this big CVS2 tournament, because CVS2 had just come out, and it was a huge tournament. It was one of the biggest, who knows, at the time, God, I don't even know. It was one of the biggest CVS2 tournaments, because the game had just come out in America at the time. There was a ton of people there, right? And what happened was, of course, I had gotten off work because I still worked at the time, right? When I got kicked out of school, I had to get a job. So my mom drove me to the tournament or whatever in Detroit. You could see pictures. I've showed pictures of it before. People think I faked this stuff. But anyway, so I'm at the tournament. I'm still wearing my Kroger uniform and everything like this. And I'm demolishing people, dude, right? And I also end up versing Flo, who no one in Michigan had ever beat in a Street Fighter game before, right? And I end up demolishing Flo, dude, right? I mean, I'm demolishing everybody in this tournament. And what happens is the tournament runs so long, I have to leave while I'm winning the tournament. I wonder if you could actually find the results of that, but it was ridiculous. So I'm winning the tournament, and the tournament was so big, it had just run to very late at night, you know what I mean? And I had to go while I was winning the tournament, right? Because I'm a kid. I can't drive. People were driving me. So I had to leave the tournament while I think I was guaranteed third place or something like that. By the time I left, I was like, I just have to go. I can't fucking stay any longer. This is so slow. And so Video actually ended up winning the tournament. And that was that famous tournament where, because it was so big, because no one had ever beat Flo before, but I was the one that beat Flo, so it doesn't even matter. And there's that, I think there was even a video of, because it's such a huge tournament for Michigan. And a raging storm to the machine after he won the tournament, apparently. And so again, I don't remember if I checked the internet after this or, it's probably a little bit before this. So I wasn't really using the internet before this and all this kind of stuff, right? And so I checked the internet. And, of course, I've never said I don't search my name. Of course I searched my name, right? And so I wanted to see about these, these few tournaments that I had gone to or whatever. And, I remember I see this first tournament I went to. There's like, oh, who's this blonde surfer boy kid? He's really good, blah, blah, blah. He's just beating everybody. And then I looked back and I saw that Midwest tournament. And I saw everyone, all these dudes, these older dudes that I had been meeting at the tournament, right? Who were acting like they were nice to me. They're like, oh, yeah, Clayton, that surfer boy kid. We saw him crying in the corner at the Daytona machine. Blah, what a crybaby. He was beating everyone in casual. And then when he saw he got to the tournament, he couldn't beat anybody. And I was like, wait, what the fuck, dude? And that's why I got a chip on my shoulder very early on, dude, right? I had to go to the hospital after that, dude. I'm like, wow. All these dudes who were so fucking nice to me that first tournament, now this second tournament where they saw me destroying all these famous dudes during casual, dude, right? And then I got sick, dude, because tournaments run so late. They tried to say that I was crying on the Daytona machine because I had lost. And I was like, what the fuck? Grown-ass men talking shit about a kid. And I was like, wow. So, I instantly saw that the video game community was, very, very fucking shady, right? So, I've told that story, and I was like, wow, these dudes are super fucking shady about all this kind of stuff, right? So, let me take a drink of water. So I'm trying to think of some other stories I could tell from back during those days. So I know one of the things that was, I know Scott mentioned this too. There used to be a big East Coast, West Coast thing. So Midwest was always kind of like the stepchild of the fighting game community. So, and one of the problems that happened was, I'm going to be all over the place right now, right? So Michigan just had this really, really big tournament for CVS2, right? And what happened is, so Masu, right? I'm going to talk shit about Masu here. This isn't like I hate Masu or anything, but this is, the story of how it went for Michigan. So Masu wanted to like ride the wave of holy crap, Michigan is becoming known. Everyone, Michigan is like a Midwest place. We don't get a lot of respect, blah, 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 blah. So Masu was trying to ride the wave of this huge Michigan tournament, right? Where I had just beaten Flo, who was, one of the only people that actually ever gets credit in the Midwest for video games, right? You know what I mean? All this kind of crap. So Masu was trying to ride the wave of this. So he held like another big CVS2 tournament, Street Fighter, all this kind of stuff at the arcade again, but it was to make sure this tournament ran better, part of the tournament was going to be on console. And he was going to be releasing the Masu arcade stick, if anyone is old enough to remember this, right? And the tournament was such a huge clusterfuck because the Masu stick, he literally set up ghetto arcade cabinets with just like a TV and 2 homemade arcade sticks that he made. And then some games would be on their arcade version of it. And oh my God, basically Michigan became like, it destroyed any credibility for Michigan because I was like, oh my God. I went to that tournament. I don't even remember what I got. I was like, holy crap, dude, these sticks are just, oh boy. And this is where the joke of, this is like a very inside joke. This isn't like a joke that is like spread throughout the community, but the Masu fireball, which of course, if people, this is a joke that me and my friends still say because there's a tournament. I got hit by like 3 fireballs just mid-screen during a match or something like that when I thought I was blocking them. And I literally walked away from like the thing. And I was like, this is complete bullshit. And so now whenever there's a joke that, and the Wizard sticks weren't even that good in the first place either. I mean, Wizards was not in the best place, but I'll get into that later. But so it basically became a joke. So whenever me and my friends now play video games and we think we're blocking something, we don't get hit, we actually have an inside joke called the Masu fireball because people were just getting hit by fireballs for no reason during this tournament because you couldn't fucking randomly block. And so it became known as the Masu fireball, and we call anything a Masu fireball now. So basically this basically destroyed any credibility that Michigan had, right? And Michigan started becoming a clusterfuck, right? Because, so here's what happened during Michigan back during those days. A certain group of people didn't want to go to Detroit because Detroit arcade sticks were already fucked up as well. Like I had literally, there are times that I walked away from the machine on Detroit sticks as well because they were just they were fucking ghetto and fucked up. And I'm like, I'm not playing on this shit. So a lot of people didn't want to play, especially after this Masu arcade stick tournament fiasco. A lot of dudes didn't want to play in Detroit, right? And then certain dudes didn't want to go to Ann Arbor to play, right? Because Boschgar won a Ann Arbor tournament, Cheese Master. He won a tournament against the Detroit guys, and then the Detroit guys were like, oh, this wouldn't happen to Detroit. So then Detroit guys didn't want to go to Ann Arbor. And so then when we tried to find a common ground and just have console tournaments, period, there was 2 console tournaments where I won, and then I think there was 1 console tournament where I got second to video. And what happened for this, SRK was trying to do this, which I guess if there's any other interesting story to tell about the console tournaments, this is also when TKK, if you guys remember him from Street Fighter 4 days, he started to become known in Michigan, which I guess to get on that subject, basically back in the day, the most well-known people for during this time was, generally speaking, Video, TKK, and me. We were the people that were generally placing the most consistently, right? Or winning, right? That was generally kind of like the narrative. So what happened is SRK at this time was doing this thing called Apex, because for Evo, they were going to be doing seeding for Evo, right? I think this might have been the first Evo that they called Evo, right? They were going to be doing something called Apex, and they were going to be doing a ranking system. And so you would hand in the results to SRK to say, this is ranking. You've won tournaments, and it would be weighed upon how many people entered the tournaments, right? And so what happened, some of these console tournaments were pretty big. And so, like I said, I think I won a couple of them, and I got second to video in one of them, right? Well, SRK had this rule where for all the tournaments, to try to make sure that no one was cheating to get like a better placing at Evo, you would have to send in your phone number of the arcade or the person running the console tournament to Evo. And then if they thought the tournament was shady, they would call the person to make sure, hey, I want to see proof that this tournament really happened. And there are pictures of me winning these tournaments, right? But of course, whatever, just fucked up agendas of the video game community, right? So what happened is SRK, and it wasn't just us, it was other tournaments too, people are getting fucked up, and this is why they never did this again, right? So I guess what happened is SRK did not want to legitimize some of these tournaments. And these console tournaments that I had won, and I got second at one of them, SRK didn't want to say, oh, there's too many people here, this can't be real. And so they did not count anybody's placing at these tournaments. So it's like, oh man. So basically, Michigan became very divided because it's like, okay, we can't run these console tournaments because if the dude is not there to pick up the phone at the time to say that, hey, this tournament really happened, they would not count towards Apex, right? And like I said, this isn't just us. Other people just at the arcade, if a person picking up the phone and they didn't pick up the phone for the arcade, your tournament just wouldn't count randomly. So the whole system was completely fucked. So basically, Michigan back in the day got completely fucked because they're like, console tournaments are out of the question. People don't want to enter Detroit tournaments because of this whole Masu fiasco with the arcade sticks, and then Wizard 6 were fucked up anyway. And then Detroit guys didn't want to go to Ann Arbor, and if the Detroit guys did go to Ann Arbor, half the time they were late, and the tournaments were running too late. So Michigan became a complete clusterfuck, right? So that was the situation in Michigan back during those days, right? Whew, this is going on long. Do I have any other stories to say about that? Oh, I know. So I said, basically back in the day, so when people were thinking about whatever, they would say, you know, video, TKK, and me, right? And if you're asking what happened to Dre, because again, Dre was considered, I guess, the second best in the Midwest at the time. The only person to ever beat him was Flo, and then I beat Flo, and then there was a tournament that I beat Dre then, right? And I was the first person, Michigan. I was the only other Michigan dude to beat Dre at the time, right? Because he had been beating everybody. And a little bit after that, Dre actually ended up quitting video games. And from what I heard, the story was, you know, he was involved in some not good stuff. And from what I've heard, it's true. But he ended up stopping entering tournaments. And I don't want to put his business out here. But, you know, not everyone, you know, that plays video games is a nerd. Some people come from a harder kind of lifestyle. Let's just put it like that. You know what I mean? But... So do I have any other stories to tell about these kind of times of so I remember stories of just me being a naive kid because, you know, I couldn't even drive at this time. You know, I told the story before. I remember reading about guys like Mike Watson and all this kind of stuff at the time. And I remember, like, when I first met those guys like Watson and APOC and all those kind of dudes, I thought I had to pay to play them. I didn't know that I could actually play these dudes that I read about in magazines, so that was kind of funny. I remember being so nervous. I had no idea that I could play Street Fighter with these guys. It was so crazy, right? I was like, I literally thought I had to give them money to, like, play me in a video game, and I was just so scared while playing them. I had no idea, just to show you how stupid I was, right? But and then it's crazy to think that, you know, one of the last tournaments I went to was that Evo, and then it was me and him in the finals of Evo, and then they pulled the fire alarm on me, and I always remember, like, man, so crazy, dude. Like, and I even told him I wish I could have played people in video games when I was really into video games, but, you know, the community had just killed my will for it. You know, I just, you know, like I said, I got a chip on my shoulder very early on when I saw the community was trying to say that I wasn't sick. It was absolutely ridiculous, but other stories from that time can I think of? So yeah, I had started getting recognition because what are some other stories? So we had gone to, there's a couple big, and I told this story on stream, a long-winded story of one of my only good memories of tournaments was that, so me and the Michigan guys, we went to a couple of big of the Canadian national tournaments, whatever. And so the first one I got, so both of them I got like 5th place, whatever it was at. So the first one, the story of that one is, you know, I remember I got there and I think I lost first round, you know what I mean? Because we get there late, of course, because people are always late, you know what I mean? That was, you know, that's something that was really shady. It's like people can never be on time, but, you know, it's who I'm riding with. So we got there late and I'm no practice. So I lose the first round. And I'm like, oh my God, what a start to this. And what happened is, so I had to fight my way out of the loser's bracket from the beginning. And again, this is going to be a long-winded story about some other shady stuff in the video game community. So I end up having to fight my way out of the loser's bracket, and I end up beating all the most famous Toronto guys, right? Because in Canada at the time, Montreal dudes were considered the best, and then Toronto was like the second tier of Montreal guys. And the best in Montreal were considered guys like JFL and Prez. They were considered the best Street Fighter kind of dudes, right? So I lost my first match, and I remember I ended up having to beat all these other guys, and while getting to 5th place, I had to beat all the top Toronto guys, right? And I know there's a tournament where I beat one of the matches. I beat JS Master while people asked me how to do the Kim Infinite, while people were laughing about that. So if Street Fighter guys remember JS Master, this is right when JS Master started to become known as a good Street Fighter guy, right? I don't think he plays anymore, but at the time, right? So, and I remember people laughed about that because I was just so pissed that, I'd won my first, or that I'd lost my first match. And then I was just like, oh man, people started talking about the Kim event. And then people laughed because JS Master was already considered one of the best in Toronto. And I was talking about how do you do the Kim Infinite in CVS2. And I told people how to do it while I was playing. Which I told the story about combo videos back in the day. So I got 5th at that tournament. And then there was another big Canada tournament, and I got 5th again. And that tournament was the fucked up one where, again, I ended up beating all the top Toronto guys again. But then I lost to the top Montreal guys. But the funny thing about that is, oh man, that was the tournament where my brother got robbed. So even while I was playing JFL, they tapped me on the shoulder, and they're like, you got to come with us after you're done with this match. And they're like, why? And they're like, don't worry, it's okay, but something happened to your brother. And I'm like, what the fuck? So... they tell me this while I'm trying to play the match, and this isn't anything against JFL, it's just telling the story. So what happened was someone had robbed my brother at the tournament. Absolutely ridiculous, but again, it goes to show you not every tournament was run in a very good place, right? So, and at the time, so JFL beat me, and, JFL and Prez were considered the best in Montreal, and so they had like a lot of recognition because JFL had beaten just earlier or around this time, whatever it was, he had beaten Arturo. Arturo is, a famous Street Fighter dude, in the community for a while now, right? So he had beaten Arturo. And so I remember, and I had been traveling for other stuff too and doing all this stuff in Michigan, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And so a lot of these Montreal guys were big shit talkers to me. They're like, oh yeah. They're like, we don't know why people think Final Showdown is good. He beat the Toronto guys, but who cares? He loses to us Montreal guys. He's a scrub, right? Who cares? He's beating people, but he can't beat us. So these dudes were complete dicks to me, dude. And then I remember as well, so then there was an Evo we went to. And what happened was it was the Evo, whatever the Evo was when Eno got 3rd place at Evo for CVS2. And the story of that was, so in casual, I was beating the Japanese and all these other dudes. I actually OCV'd Eno with my Kim in CVS2, right? And, other people saw it and all this kind of stuff. And I beat Watson. I beat Valier and all this kind of stuff. And of course, I would never talk shit about, Watson or anything like that. I looked up to these dudes as a kid, right? But I mean, I was feeling good because I was destroying people in casual again at this Evo. And so I don't remember who I lost to. I lost to some California dude eventually, right? And so I'd gotten off the machine. And again, I didn't really use the internet very much at this time, but I had looked at, of course, I looked up my name again on SRK, whatever it was. And I saw all these Montreal guys and all these other guys saying like, oh, Final Showdown was bragging how he like beat the Japanese in casual, and how he's beating Watson and Valier and all this kind of stuff in casual, for CVS2, whatever, blah, blah. And I didn't say any of this shit. And I was like, wow, dude, I'm just a fucking random kid at this time, dude, right? And I'm like, dude, these dudes saw me beat these guys in casual, so they're trying to say that I like was bragging about it. I'm like, what the fuck? Why the fuck would they say that? And so I remember I was in such a bummed mood that these dudes would try to say that I was talking shit about, a dude that I actually looked up to, just years before. Why would I go I was feeling cool that I actually, it was just a casual match, but I still felt cool. I was OCV'd the Japanese. You know what I mean? I remember I was in such a bad mood for that. And, I was just like, wow, dude, these dudes are so fucking shady, talking about like a fucking sick kid that is just playing video games for fun. So I was in a terrible mood. But so then what happened was, to continue, one of the only good stories I have from Street Fighter was that, and I'll finish this up since this has been about a half hour. Stop here. And then I'll continue on if people want me to continue on. But so there was a big Montreal tournament, right? So we went to Montreal, and I don't remember what it was, 9, 10, 12 hours, whatever the fuck it was. It was absolutely insane driving there. It was crazy. So we went to this Montreal tournament. And again, I think I lost first round or some bullshit. You know what I mean? Because we don't get to practice. It took us so fucking long to get there. And I end up, then in the tournament in Montreal, and all these Montreal guys had been talking shit about Final Showdown, blah, blah, blah. He's just getting lucky when he does all this stuff before. And I ended up versing JFL, again, who JFL and Prez were considered like the best then in Canada. You know, JFL just beating Arturo, all this kind of stuff. And I ended up beating JFL at the tournament. And that was one of the only times that I remember the arcade went crazy and all these dudes bum rushed me and they like lifted me up and all this kind of stuff. Again, I couldn't even drive at the time, you know, as a fucking kid. And they lifted me up and they're like, Final Showdown, we will never call you a scrub again. We'll never talk shit about you ever again. No scrub could ever beat JFL in a tournament. We're sorry for saying all that. You know what I mean? So I remember they said that. And it was anticlimactic, though, because I think I got third at the tournament. So then Prez beat me, and then I think it was Arcade Kid who beat me. So it was anticlimactic, I guess, but it was still kind of a good memory at the time that that happened. It was kind of interesting because I'd never had an arcade bum rush me at that time. But anyway, you know, of course, they still were talking shit about me all that time before, but I guess it was kind of nice that they said they were sorry about all that. But again, it was at the end of the day anticlimactic, right? But anyway, I'll stop there because that was a half hour. I can continue video game stories more another day if people want.